My guest today went from the stress of having multiple miscarriages to simultaneously navigating life with a new foster son and a successful pregnancy. Find out how she and her husband navigated that situation and what she wishes she learned more about in her foster parent training when we talk to Kathryn on this episode of Adoption Uncovered. Just tell me your name. We can start there.
I'm Kathryn. I am 47-year-old mom of two. My oldest is adopted. He's 13, and I have a biological daughter who is 12. She's 11 and a half months younger than my son.
Oh, man. When did adopting first occur to you that was something that you might want to do?
I think it was something, and my husband would say this too. I think it was something that was sort of always in the back of my mind. I mean, my intention was to have kids biologically and also to potentially adopt. And then I had several miscarriages back to back in my early 30s. So I had my first at 30. And I soon after the second one, the point is I started feeling like, okay, maybe this isn't going to happen biologically. And I was feeling a little bit lost. I had another miscarriage. And I just happened to be lying on the couch one day and saw information about adopting from China.
Oh.
And my husband came home from work and I was like, let's adopt from China.
Wow. And he was like, yes, let's do it.
Yeah, I think
Nice.
the whole one child policy at that time was resulting in lots of infant girls being abandoned. And so I think that just really spoke to me. It was something that, really affected me on a pretty deep level. And I thought, there's all these babies, let's just do this. And so we started the process right away, actually.
China's one-child policy had been active in China for over 20 years by the time Kathryn and her husband felt that adopting from that country was the right thing to do. The Chinese government imposed stiff fines on families who decided to have more than one child in the country. And yet culture, especially in rural areas, dictated that only a male child would care for parents in old age and be able to manage their estate. Women typically went to live with their husband's family in their house. This meant that some families would abandon or kill their baby daughters so they could have another chance for a son. If an abandoned baby was found, that child could be offered for adoption. Then, in 2007, China implemented new rules that drastically slowed the international adoption process and limited who could adopt and which children could be adopted. Kathryn and her husband couldn't have imagined how this policy would affect them when they began their process.
So let's just get the ball rolling with adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And initially, we actually began an international adoption process with China. And when we began that process, we were under the impression it would be about an 18-month process.
Oh my gosh.
Over the course of just time, it would have ultimately been 6 years.
Oh my gosh, that is long.
Yeah. So a couple years into it, I think we kind of saw the writing on the wall, and we decided we would become foster parents. And so we did that training in the spring of 2007. And we were, I think, officially certified by the fall. And we got our first call in March, the following March 2008. And the rest is history.
So a lot of people don't even know about the training. and what that can be
Okay.
like.
Okay.
Mhm.
It's been, 14, going on 15 years ago now. So it's a
Mhm.
little fuzzy,
Yeah. Oh, I'm
but
sure.
I remember that I thought the training was good. I had actually done some parenting classes with our China adoption process. So that's really all I had to compare it to. I don't know, was it 12 weeks, something like that, like one evening a week. They wanted people to take sibling groups. And I thought, that was like really pro child. And so I felt good about that. I mean, I didn't, that really wasn't my intention. I was going to be a
Right.
first time mom.
Right.
but,
Let's ask.
but yeah, I mean, I understood, that was important. I also recall, doing some work around race. In hindsight, it wasn't enough.
Okay.
But I remember being glad that there was, talk about what it means to adopt transracially. We had already done some of that with our waiting process with China,
Mhm.
but we were open to any race. So we, that was important to do, more education around that piece. Um, and then one thing I remember is being told, you know, the goal is reunification. However, we want you to be fully invested in the children that you foster. So it's like, we don't know what's going to happen, but regardless, we want you to put your whole heart and soul into this parenting thing. And so we had every intention of doing that.
Mhm.
I mean, my hope was that we would be able to adopt, but I also understood like the goal is reunification.
Right.
And so it's kind of a weird place as a foster parent who wants to adopt. It's kind of a weird place to be, um, because we wanted to be parents. Like that was our main goal. Um, and again, it was going to be our first. So those are some things I remember from that period. And then I remember that it was a little frustrating toward the end when we were waiting to be certified because there was just like paperwork challenges, like,
Oh no.
it just maybe getting lost or like, I don't remember. I just remember being frustrated in the end. But ultimately, we were certified, the same year we did the training. So it probably, in the grand scheme of things, was not that long a process. But for us, it felt like it.
Yeah. Oh, and because paperwork snafus are just part of the process. So
Yeah.
once you get the hang of that, then it's easy to handle the rest of it,
Right.
right?
Right.
When you've done your training, jumped through the hoops, and waited, your first placement day can be an event to remember.
It was probably 6 months before we got our first call, maybe not even. And we got to the point there that we started thinking, is this just not going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And then out of the blue, like we got the call.
So I'd love to know, like, what was that day like? Like you got the call
Oh my
and
gosh.
do you remember? Like, is it one of those moments where I remember where I was at that
Yeah.
moment?
Oh
Or
yes. Oh yes. So we were both at work. I was working for a solar energy and energy efficiency company at the time. I had already told them that we were planning to foster and that once we became foster parents, once we brought a child home, that I was going to stop working. And they were great. They were like, we're flexible. We love having
oh,
you. We
nice.
get it. So it was like the afternoon. It was in the afternoon. I think the person who does the calling had tried to call me first, didn't get me, so called Chris. Anyway, she eventually got both of us. We talked individual, just with one another
Mm-hmm.
about whether we were going to do it. And I think at first we were just so stunned because by this point, I had my first miscarriage in 2004, and this was 2008. So we
Oh
had
yeah.
just started feeling like, is it ever going to happen? Are we ever going to get to be parents?
Right. Right.
And so we're stunned and we were like, did we do it? I remember calling my sister and she was like, go get that baby. And so anyway, Chris and I, made the decision. Okay, yes, we're going to do this. And of course, we had to give them a pretty quick answer.
Right.
They called the next family.
Mm-hmm.
So I said my goodbyes to my work folks, and I had to drive down I-40. It was raining.
Oh my goodness.
And I met my husband at our house. We already had, of course, we had the infant seed and some other things already prepared. Because we had actually said we would like to be matched with an infant if,
right.
If infant comes into care, we would like to be considered. And so anyway, we met at home. We got the things we needed, and we arrived at the hospital. We forgot the seat, and so
oh no.
So we got up to the floor to the, delivery, the baby ward. I don't know what it's called.
Maternity.
And yes, thank you. And we were like checking in or whatever, and Chris said, "Oh, the car seat." So he had to go back to the car and get it. So I ended up meeting Kayla by myself.
Oh.
So yeah, so I got to see him first and hold him, and then my husband came in and we fed him while we were there. It really didn't take very long. I mean, I think we were probably there an hour max.
Yeah.
And then we had a baby in the car that we were driving home and taking pictures and
I bet. As memorable as that first day was, it didn't take long for Kathryn and her family to hit some rocky times navigating the system. I know you had to deal with a lot of different social workers and people like that. Did you have any that really came through for you and were really helpful? Do you have any stories like that, or any that were really kind of stood in the way?
Yeah. So this was a Friday when we got the call and brought our son home. And based on the information we were given, we had the impression that this was a child that didn't have anywhere else to go. So we really, right from the get-go, thought he's going to be with us for a long time. And whether or not we were able to adopt him is an unknown, but we really felt like this is for a long time.
Right.
So this was a Friday. On Monday, we were told that they might be coming to pick him up.
Oh my goodness.
And
we took all your pictures, and now what are you going to do?
We were devastated.
Right.
And right then and there, I knew I won't be able to do this again. Like, it was too hard already. I mean, we were already attached. I mean, I'm an adoptive mom, and also I gave birth. Mm-hmm. And really, I mean, I went through the same, feelings of attachment right away with both, that deep love. And so anyway, so long story short, we packed everything up and we're preparing. Oh. And the issue, it was a jurisdiction issue. Like, birth mom was from a different county, had the baby in our county. And so we were really turned off by the fact that this child had already suffered a deep trauma. The worst, primal loss is deep trauma. And we were there. I mean, we had him, like, why not just leave him be? And so we let our thoughts and feelings be known. And we got in a little bit of trouble for
Oh,
that.
right.
And so we got called into a meeting, like not knowing that we were in trouble. And there was a social worker who would turn out to be his worker for the long haul. And her boss, who really like stood up for us, like they understood, our feelings, and didn't feel like, because it basically, they were saying, well, you guys are too like emotional about this. And they didn't say that in those words, but that was kind of the gist of it. So we're going to have to move him somewhere else in our county, like not even to the other county. And we were like, you have got to be kidding me. We were just advocating for him. Like we thought we were just advocating. So anyway, the worker who became his social worker, and her boss really, spoke up for us and said, I think that they can do this, and they're going to be good foster parents to this baby. And so that was that. And then we kept our mouths shut going forward.
Right. You learned your lesson at that point, right?
I did.
To advocate quietly.
Yeah. So I remember feeling so confused because, like I said, in that training, it was put your whole heart and soul into this process. Be, the child's parent. Love this child.
Right.
And so we had done that right away. Like we fallen in love right away, and it was our first, and we had been waiting a long time. And then, for us to like do what I think any parent would do, which is say, hey, I don't think this would be good for this baby. Like,
right.
And to kind of be, slapped on the wrist for that. That was confusing and difficult. But like I said, there were two folks in that room of many that was also like really intimidating that came through for us. So, and then within 6 months, we started being told that more than likely we'd be able to adopt. It was a rough 6 months just because there was so many unknowns. And 2 months in, I got pregnant.
Oh my goodness.
So I was also dealing with, morning sickness and all of that, in addition to having a baby.
Right.
And just the worry about having another miscarriage and potentially losing the baby we were fostering too. It was just a very stressful, heart-wrenching time. But at the same time, we treasured every moment.
So you were able to walk that line. That was like being in the moment and appreciating it, but then also being really stressed out. You figured that out for yourself then.
Yeah. Finding that balance between holding on and letting go.
Kathryn's adoption of her son finally became official, and she also gave birth to a daughter. As time went on, her son struggled to regulate his emotions and focus, making school tricky for him.
Because he was in foster care, he was followed by a little while by the county, like the developmental folks, just to make sure he was on track. And he was on track with everything. I mean, in fact, we felt like he talked early, he walked early. But as he got older, we started becoming aware that everything with him was just more intense. Like, the highs were really high, the lows were really low. And transitions were really difficult. So we started, when he was preschool age, we had him evaluated for the first time. First time around, they didn't find anything. And then we took him to a neuropsychologist just before he started kindergarten. And she gave us some recommendations that we followed through on. Eventually, and it was a long time actually, 10 years old, he was finally diagnosed with a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. I've learned a lot in the last 3 years about this. There's a high percentage of kids that come into the foster care system, like between 70 and 80%, who were exposed to alcohol in the womb. And so there are lots and lots of undiagnosed kids out there, because a lot of times there's not disclosure because of the stigma.
Right.
And so this is a piece that I think is really important in like foster parent training. And maybe they're talking about it now. I wouldn't know because I've not been a part of it for so long. But like I said, it's very very common in foster care. So anyway, I've learned a lot. It's a difficult diagnosis because it's invisible, but alcohol actually affects the entire brain. I think, back in the 80s, everybody was worried about so-called crack babies and what, the impacts of that. But really what I've learned is alcohol is the worst. And there's just not a lot of awareness about it, frankly. So anyway, I've found some organizations that are doing a lot of advocacy work. There's actually a bill in Congress right now to try to get some funding to raise awareness and, just for more programs for people diagnosed with an FASD, and also, for prevention. And so anyway, there's a lot that needs to happen, but at least we finally have a better understanding. He got diagnosed with a variety of things over the years. And ultimately, we came to understand that this was his primary diagnosis, and getting, clear about what that means has been important. So there's that piece. And he's doing okay now. I homeschooled him for a couple of years because he was just really struggling in school, but he's been back in school the last couple of years, and it's still a real challenge, but we're proud of him. He's hanging in there.
Oh, yeah. Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder was only discovered in 1973. Then it was called fetal alcohol syndrome. Since that time, scientists' understanding of this condition has broadened. In the U.S., we don't consider any level of alcohol consumption during pregnancy to be safe. Binge drinking, especially, is now known to cause permanent brain damage to babies in the womb, whose livers haven't developed enough to filter out the alcohol mom consumes. Fetal brains that absorb the brunt of their mom's drinking pay the price later with ADHD-like symptoms and possible learning disorders. Adopted children from the U.S. and internationally as well are affected by this condition far more than previously suspected and are often misdiagnosed. FASD is not the only challenge Kathryn has had to learn how to face as she raised her adopted son.
I think another piece that has been bigger than what I anticipated was the fact that he's a different race from the rest of us. I was trying to talk about this earlier, and then I think I got sidetracked, but I followed a blog while we were waiting parents called Love Is Not Enough. And the whole idea, and it eventually became Anti-Racist Parenting, was the name of the blog. But the whole idea was that, you can't, as parents of a different race, particularly white parents of Black children, there's not enough love you can give them to help them overcome the challenges of being adopted transracially. And so that's been a hard thing to come to terms with, because I think even though we knew love is not enough, I think we still thought, like, we got this,
Right.
We do everything right. It's all going to be okay. And he's going to, have a strong identity, and we're going to teach them all about Black history. But it just, in our society, race is still a huge
Mm-hmm.
factor in so many ways. And he feels different. Like, he can't hide the fact that he's adopted, right? And
Right.
so, like, if when he's with us, I think he probably feels like folks are looking at him. He just always feels different and feels like, I think he feels like we don't get him, and which I don't think is true, but
Right.
he just feels like an outsider a lot. And we have one nephew who's also adopted. If we could have adopted more kids, we would have more kids of color. I think that could have made a difference for him, because he's the only in our family, the only Black child in our family. I didn't understand the challenges that go with that. I can't talk to him about what to do if you get pulled over by the police when you're driving a car at 16 years old, with an actual understanding of what that experience is like.
Right.
Whereas a Black parent of a Black child, they're sharing from
Right.
their own wisdom and lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just, there's things like that are more challenging than I understood before I became a parent.
Are there any particular incidents you can think of, or any situations that he has had to face and you've had to walk him through, or anything like that about his race?
When he was in elementary school, he had an assistant principal threatened to call the police. This child was 9 years old, and what he had done was not even, it was pretty typical 9-year-old boy behavior. And the assistant principal was bluffing, but regardless, it was traumatic, obviously.
Yeah.
It was traumatic for him, and it was traumatic for us as his parents. We raised heck about it. Told this will never happen. We were told this will never happen again. And a year later, it happened again.
Oh my goodness.
Same administrator. And this time she had a business card of a police officer who was also a parent that she showed him. And initially she denied. The only reason I even knew about it was because he came home and told me. He came home from school. He was in 4th grade at this time. And so I reached out to the principal, and he told me that initially the assistant principal had denied that she had done this. She'd already gotten in trouble for doing it. So anyway, that was traumatic, to say the least.
Oh, yeah.
It was the next year that I started homeschooling him.
Kathryn continues to advocate for her son. His FASD diagnosis has helped her understand his behavior in the classroom and at home. She wishes education about this condition that affects so many children in foster care was a regular part of the training she had received early on. If you want to find out more about FASD, you can look up information on the CDC website, or you can also look up the website of the nonprofit National Organization on Fetal Alcohol Syndrome. You can find these links and more information about FASD on my website, adoptionuncovered.com. And thank you.